Aunt Kendra pointed her manicured finger at my 10-year-old son and told him his mother was a complete failure. She laughed while my children stood frozen at the family barbecue. "Your mother is a bottom feeder," she sneered. "Do not grow up to be a worthless admin like her." When my kids came home in tears, I did not scream or throw a fit. I simply tucked them into bed, kissed their foreheads, and picked up my phone to call my property manager. I told him to evict the tenant at 910 Sycamore Lane. That tenant was Aunt Kendra. She had no idea she was living in a house owned by the very niece she just publicly humiliated. My name is Maya, and I am 34 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated your worth. The front door opened, barely making a sound, but the heavy silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. I walked into the hallway and found Jaden and Lily standing there. Jaden, who is usually full of energy and eager to tell me about his day, stared at the floor with his jaw clenched tightly. Lily, who is only 8 years old, had tears streaming down her face. She dropped her small backpack and ran into my arms, burying her face in my sweater. I knelt down on the hardwood floor and rubbed her back, asking Jaden what happened. He refused to look at me at first. He just kicked at the rug beneath his sneakers. Finally, his voice broke. "Aunt Kendra made fun of us in front of everyone." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I asked him to explain. Jaden took a deep breath and told me that during the family barbecue, Aunt Kendra gathered everyone around the patio. She pointed to my 10-year-old Honda Civic parked on the street. She used it as a prop for her cruel comedy routine. She told Jaden and Lily to look at that piece of junk. She said it was proof that their mother was a complete failure, who could not provide a decent life. She told my children that I was nothing but a bottom feeder working a dead-end admin job. She warned them that if they did not study hard, they would end up exactly like me, begging for scraps. The worst part was that my older brother Marcus stood right there holding a plate of ribs and laughed along with her. Nobody defended my kids. Nobody told Aunt Kendra she was crossing a line. They just let my children stand there burning with shame. I pulled Lily closer to my chest and reached out to hold Jaden by his shoulder. I looked my son directly in his eyes and told him to never let anyone dictate his value. I promised them both that we were doing just fine. I wiped the tears away from her cheeks and walked them to their bedrooms. I tucked them under their warm blankets and waited until their breathing became heavy and steady. Once they were completely asleep, I walked into my home office and locked the door behind me. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel the need to call Marcus and scream at him. I certainly did not intend to call Aunt Kendra to beg for an apology. Apologies are utterly useless when dealing with people who enjoy inflicting pain. Instead, I sat down at my mahogany desk and opened my laptop. Growing up, Aunt Kendra always belittled my quiet nature. She constantly praised Marcus because he married a wealthy white woman named Chloe. Kendra practically worshipped Chloe because of her family money. She thought my administrative job was a humiliating stain on our family image. What Aunt Kendra did not know was that my boring administrative job was just a cover. I actually own a highly successful private equity firm and an anonymous real estate management company called Apex Holdings. I prefer to live quietly under the radar while they drown in their flashy debt. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line to my property manager. He answered on the second ring. I kept my voice perfectly calm and steady. "The tenant at 910 Sycamore Lane," I said clearly. "Kendra Brooks. I want you to issue a 30-day eviction notice first thing tomorrow morning. No warnings and absolutely no extensions." I hung up the phone and smiled. The time for being the quiet family scapegoat was officially over. Let the games officially begin right now. The next morning started just like any other Wednesday. I woke up early, made breakfast for Jaden and Lily, and packed their lunches before dropping them off at school. After kissing them goodbye, I drove my 10-year-old Honda Civic to the Midtown office building where I pretend to be a low-level administrative assistant. I walked into my private corner office, locked the door behind me, and opened my laptop to review the quarterly earnings for my real estate portfolio. Just as I took my first sip of black coffee, my cell phone started vibrating aggressively across my desk. It buzzed once, twice, and then erupted into a continuous hum. I picked it up and saw notifications flooding in from our family text thread, which Aunt Kendra had ironically named Brooke's Family Blessings. I unlocked my phone and watched the chaos unfold in real time. The first message was a blurry photograph of a legally binding document taped securely to a front door. It was the 30-day notice to quit served exactly as I had instructed. The official letterhead of Apex Holdings, LLC, sat boldly at the top of the page. Beneath the photo, Aunt Kendra had sent 7 messages in rapid succession, all typed in capital letters. She was completely hysterical. She typed that she was being thrown out onto the street like a stray dog. She cursed the greedy corporate landlords who were destroying hard-working families. She demanded that everyone in the chat pray for her because the devil was clearly attacking her home. I leaned back in my leather ergonomic chair and scrolled through her dramatic performance. It was entirely lost on her that she had not paid a single dime in rent for the past 4 months. She honestly believed that living in a property owned by a faceless corporation meant she could just live there for free indefinitely. My brother Marcus was the first to reply. He sent a series of shocked face emojis and asked how this could possibly happen. He told her to call the leasing office and demand an extension. Aunt Kendra replied that she had already tried calling, but the property manager flat out refused to negotiate. Then her attention turned exactly where I knew it would. She directed her rage straight at me. She tagged my phone number so my name highlighted in bold blue text for the entire family to see. "Look at this, Maya," she typed. "This is exactly what happens in the real world when you have absolutely zero power and no money. If you had bothered to get a real career instead of pushing papers, maybe you could actually help your family in a crisis." She followed that up with an even sharper insult. She told me that if I had applied myself and married well like Marcus did with Chloe, I might actually be useful. She said if I were anything like my sister-in-law, my own flesh and blood aunt would not be getting thrown out on the street by some heartless corporate machine. I sat perfectly still in my quiet office, watching the text bubbles pop up. I did not type a single letter in response. I did not even begin to form a reply. I just let the read receipts show that I had seen every single cruel word she wrote. I remembered how Aunt Kendra used to steal the monetary gifts my father gave me when I was a teenager, claiming she needed it to keep up appearances at her country club. She always valued the illusion of extreme wealth over actual integrity. She believed that pretending to be rich was more important than being honest. I took another sip of my coffee, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. She was right about one thing. A heartless corporate machine was indeed throwing her out. She just had no clue that the machine had my face. Suddenly, the group chat went completely silent for 2 full minutes. The stage was being set for the grand entrance. Then the typing indicator appeared next to Chloe's name. My sister-in-law loved moments like this. She thrived on playing the ultimate savior to our less fortunate African-American family. Chloe finally sent her message. "Oh my goodness, Aunt Kendra, please do not panic," she wrote. "This is absolutely terrible, but I am not going to let this happen to you. I will have my family trust fund lawyer contact this Apex Holdings LLC immediately. We will just buy the house directly from them with cash. Nobody evicts my family. Do not shed another tear. I will handle these corporate bullies for you." I read her message and let out a genuine laugh that echoed in my quiet, empty office. My laughter had barely faded when my cell phone rang again. This time it was not a group text, but a direct call. The caller ID displayed Chloe's name accompanied by a glamorous photo of her at a charity gala. I took a deep breath, smoothed my expression, even though she could not see me, and calmly answered the call. "Hello, Chloe?" I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat and unbothered. "Maya, sweetie." She began, her tone dripping with fake sympathy and condescension. I am sure you saw the group chat. It is just so truly awful what is happening to poor Aunt Kendra right now. Those corporate landlords are absolute monsters. I hummed quietly in agreement, letting her talk. I just wanted to call you directly because Marcus and I are generously stepping up to handle this crisis, she continued. My family trust is going to purchase the property outright so Aunt Kendra never has to worry about being evicted again. But Maya, since I am doing this massive favor for your side of the family, I think it is only right that you contribute your fair share to the down payment. I raised an eyebrow at my computer monitor. My fair share, I repeated slowly. Chloe sighed dramatically into the receiver, as if explaining a simple concept to a toddler. Yes, Maya, you are her niece. You cannot just sit back and let my white family swoop in and save your African American relatives without showing some effort. It looks bad. I need you to wire $20,000 to my escrow account by Friday. I sat up straight in my chair. $20,000 was not a random number. Chloe knew exactly what that amount represented. That was the exact balance of the college savings account I had supposedly scraped together for Jaden and Lily. She had pried that information out of Marcus months ago. You want me to give you my children's college fund? I asked, my voice dropping an octave. Chloe clicked her tongue. Do not be so dramatic, Maya. They are young. You have plenty of time to save up again from your little secretary job. Aunt Kendra needs a roof over her head right now. Consider it a test of your family loyalty. If you do not wire the money, I will make sure everyone knows you refuse to help save her home. I did not argue with her. I did not yell or defend my finances. I simply told her I would think about it and ended the call. Chloe thought she held all the cards. She thought she was backing a desperate, helpless woman into a corner. She had absolutely no idea she was trying to extort money from the very landlord she was pretending to fight. I set my phone face down on the desk and turned my attention back to my laptop. I opened my secure corporate email client for Apex Holdings. Right at the top of my inbox was a new message from a flashy downtown real estate attorney representing Chloe. The subject line read Urgent Purchase Offer for 910 Sycamore Lane. I carefully opened the email and immediately reviewed the attached legal documents. Chloe was offering 20% over the market value of the house, hoping to entice the faceless corporate owner into a quick cash sale. It was an aggressive and highly confident move, but as the owner of a private equity firm, I never enter into any transaction without conducting thorough due diligence. I forwarded the buyer information to my lead forensic accountant and instructed him to run a comprehensive background check on Chloe and her vaunted family trust fund. I told him to dig deep into their current liquidity, their outstanding debts, and their credit utilization. I wanted to know exactly where her money was coming from. Less than an hour later, my accountant sent back a highly encrypted file marked urgent. I opened the dossier and began reading the financial summary. What I saw made my jaw drop. The massive secret Chloe had been hiding from Marcus and our entire family was spelled out in black and white bank statements. Her family trust fund had been completely depleted 3 years ago. Her parents were secretly drowning in massive debt and facing multiple aggressive lawsuits from various creditors. Chloe was not buying the house with generational wealth at all. She was attempting to secure a predatory high-interest subprime loan through a shadow lender. The loan required massive origination fees up front. That was exactly why she was trying to extort $20,000 from my children. Chloe was broke, and she was trying to steal my hard-earned money to fund her fake white savior complex and maintain her pathetic illusion of wealth. I scrolled further down the encrypted document, my eyes scanning line after line of staggering debt. Chloe and her supposedly elite family were drowning in a financial sinkhole. The country club memberships, the luxury vehicles, and the sprawling estate her parents owned were all heavily mortgaged or actively in default. They had been moving money around for years, playing a dangerous game of financial roulette just to keep up appearances. The trust fund she bragged about constantly had a balance of absolutely zero. It was a completely hollow shell. She was not a wealthy heiress swooping in to save her African American in-laws. She was nothing more than a desperate fraud drowning in a sea of hidden red ink. Looking at these documents, a wave of realization washed over me regarding my brother Marcus and his lavish wedding. 5 years ago, when Marcus and Chloe got married, she insisted on an extravagant country club ceremony. She hired a celebrity event planner, ordered custom ice sculptures, and flew in rare orchids from overseas. Aunt Kendra had spent the entire reception gloating about how Marcus had successfully married into old money and secured our family legacy. She mocked my simple dress and told me to take notes on how real wealth operates. I remember Marcus looking incredibly proud, believing he had won the lottery. Now, staring at the credit reports, I realized the entire wedding had been a complete sham. Chloe had financed the entire circus using a web of high-limit credit cards and personal loans disguised as her family wealth. Marcus had unknowingly married into massive, unmanageable debt, and Chloe had been lying directly to his face since the very first day they ever met. Her current plan to buy Aunt Kendra the house was just another reckless scam. The documents showed she had applied for a mortgage through an unregulated shadow lender. It was a predatory subprime loan with an adjustable interest rate that would bankrupt anyone within 2 years. But the lender required a massive cash down payment and non-refundable origination fees up front just to process the shady paperwork. The total amount required for those fees was exactly $20,000. Chloe did not have a single dime of liquid cash to her name. That was the real reason she was trying to bully me into emptying the college savings account I had set up for Jaden and Lily. She desperately needed my hard-earned money to secure a highly toxic loan under the fake guise of saving the family. She was willing to steal the future of my children just to maintain her fake savior narrative and keep Aunt Kendra worshipping the ground she walked on. I sat back in my chair and took a deep breath. The old Maya, the quiet sister who always avoided conflict, might have called Marcus and tearfully explained the situation. The old Maya might have confronted Chloe directly and begged her to stop. But the old Maya was dead. I was the silent owner of Apex Holdings, and I held all the power. I did not need to scream or cry to destroy her little illusion. I simply needed to do my job. I opened my email client and drafted a formal response to the flashy real estate attorney representing Chloe. I kept the language strictly professional and entirely devastating. I typed that Apex Holdings, LLC, was officially declining the purchase offer for the property located at 910 Sycamore Lane. Under the required fields for the rejection reasoning, I did not select the standard options. I typed out a custom response. The offer is permanently rejected due to the discovery of fraudulent financials, severe lack of legitimate liquid assets, and predatory lending practices attached to the buyer. I attached a brief summary of the rejected credit check just so her lawyer would know exactly why his client was being denied. I reviewed the email, ensuring there were no emotional attachments or hints to my true identity. It was a cold, calculated corporate execution. I moved my mouse over the send button and clicked it. The email vanished into cyberspace, carrying a financial death sentence straight to Chloe. I closed my laptop, checking my watch. It was almost time for my lunch break. I imagined Chloe sitting in her heavily mortgaged house, waiting for the glorious news that she had successfully purchased the property. I pictured her phone chiming with an email from her lawyer. Instead of a celebration, she was about to receive documented proof that her entire financial facade had been exposed by a faceless corporation. I smiled, knowing that Chloe was about to completely lose her mind, and she still had no idea that the worthless administrative assistant she despised was the one pulling the strings. Sunday evening brought the dreaded family dinner at Marcus and Chloe's house. I parked my old Honda next to Chloe's leased luxury SUV. Their sprawling McMansion sat in a gated community looking like the pinnacle of financial success. But walking up the brick pathway, I only saw a hollow facade built on high-interest debt. I walked through the front doors holding Jaden and Lily by their small hands. The smell of roasted chicken and expensive candles filled the incredibly tense air. Marcus offered a stiff hug, while Chloe barely acknowledged me. She paced around the marble kitchen island, clutching her cell phone with white knuckles. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her silk blouse was slightly wrinkled. She looked exactly like a desperate woman whose fraudulent loan application had just been denied. We all moved into the formal dining room and quietly took our assigned seats around a massive custom mahogany table. Aunt Kendra immediately claimed the seat at the head of the large table, acting as if she were the royal matriarch of our entire family. Before the heavy dinner plates were even passed around, she started her usual theatrical performance. She raised her crystal wine glass and loudly declared that she wanted to make a special toast to Chloe. Aunt Kendra looked at my sister-in-law with absolute adoration, calling her a literal angel sent from heaven to save our family from total ruin. She went on and on about how incredibly blessed Marcus was to have found a woman of such high-class wealth and immense generosity. While she delivered this passionate speech, Aunt Kendra kept shooting sharp, glaring looks directly at me across the perfectly set table. She made sure to emphasize how some people in this family were completely useless burdens, while others were true saviors willing to step up during a crisis. I just sat quietly slicing a piece of roasted chicken, for Lily refusing to give Kendra the emotional reaction she so desperately craved. Despite the glowing praise and constant validation, Chloe did not look happy at all. In fact, she looked like she was on the verge of a complete nervous breakdown. She took a massive gulp of her red wine and slammed the delicate glass down on the table much harder than necessary. The crystal clinked sharply against the hard wood, making Marcus jump slightly in his seat. Chloe ignored him completely and stared directly at me with a look of pure, unhinged aggression. The gracious, wealthy savior routine had completely vanished, leaving only bitter panic. She leaned forward, placing both of her hands flat on the table, and let out a shaky breath. She did not even try to ease into the conversation politely. She just launched her verbal attack right there in front of my young children and the entire family. She aggressively announced that she had been working tirelessly with her expensive lawyers all weekend to secure the house for Aunt Kendra. She claimed the corporate landlords were being completely unreasonable and demanding a much higher cash deposit up front than they originally discussed. Then she pointed her finger right at my face. Her voice was loud and completely frantic, lacking any of her usual fake Southern charm. She told everyone at the table that I needed to step up right this second. She said she was doing all the heavy lifting for my side of the family, and it was finally time for me to pull my own weight. Maya. I need that $20,000 transferred into my account right now, she demanded, her voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. She insisted that if I did not wire the money by tomorrow morning, the entire real estate deal would fall through and Aunt Kendra would be living on the street. She framed the situation as an absolute life or death emergency, trying to publicly shame me into handing over my cash. Marcus nodded along, telling me to just do the right thing for once in my pathetic life. Aunt Kendra crossed her arms and glared at me, waiting for me to bow my head and surrender to their demands. The entire dining room went dead silent as all eyes locked onto me. They expected me to crumble under the heavy weight of their collective judgment. They expected me to frantically apologize and hand over the money out of sheer embarrassment. Instead, I reached out and picked up my glass of iced sweet tea. I took a long, slow sip, feeling the cool liquid soothe my throat. I carefully placed the glass back onto the coaster directly in front of me. I looked Chloe dead in her frantic eyes and spoke with absolute clarity. "No," I said calmly. "That is my kid's college money." The silence that followed my refusal was so thick it felt like it could suffocate everyone in the room. Then Aunt Kendra exploded. She slammed both of her hands down on the mahogany table with such extreme force that the crystal wine glasses rattled aggressively and the expensive silverware clattered loudly against the fine china. "How dare you!" she screamed, her face contorting with absolute rage. "You selfish, bitter little girl!" I sat perfectly still as her voice echoed through the massive dining room. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger right at my face, accusing me of being insanely jealous of my sister-in-law. "You just cannot stand the fact that Chloe is successful And you are nothing, she yelled. You cannot stand that Marcus married a wealthy woman who actually knows how to take care of her family while you are still working some dead-end job. She is trying to save your own flesh and blood from being homeless, and you are hoarding a pathetic $20,000 like it is a fortune. Marcus immediately jumped in to back her up, puffing out his chest to defend his wife. Maya, you need to show some respect, he demanded, pointing his fork at me across the large table. Chloe has been working her fingers to the bone all weekend, dealing with her lawyers trying to fix this mess for Aunt Kendra. The very least you can do is contribute your fair share to the down payment. Stop acting like a stubborn victim and just hand over the cash. It is for the greater good of this family. I looked at my brother, feeling a deep mixture of pity and disgust. He had no idea that his wife was completely broke and using him as a pawn to secure a fraudulent loan. He honestly believed he was valiantly defending a wealthy philanthropist. Aunt Kendra decided to take her manipulation a step further, leaning across the table to deliver what she thought would be a guilt trip. I raised you, Maya, she hissed, her eyes narrowing. When your parents struggled, I was the one who stepped up and made sure you had a roof over your head. You owe me your life, and this is exactly how you repay my sacrifices. You are a heartless, ungrateful disgrace to this family. I set my napkin down on the table, my patience evaporating. I looked Aunt Kendra directly in her eyes, refusing to let her rewrite our history in front of my children. You did not raise me, Aunt Kendra, I said, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through the tension. You took me into your house for 2 years when I was a teenager. And during those 2 years you completely drained the small trust fund my father left me for my college education. You did not use that money to feed me or clothe me. You illegally used my money to buy yourself a Lexus and pay off your country club dues. You literally stole my future to secretly fund your fake high society lifestyle. Aunt Kendra gasped, placing a dramatic hand over her chest as if I had just stabbed her. She looked around the table, waiting for Marcus or Chloe to defend her honor, but the truth hung in the air. I had never spoken about the stolen trust fund out loud before this moment. I had always kept the peace to avoid tearing our family apart. But they had finally pushed me way too far today, trying to steal from my innocent children the same way they had stolen from me. Seeing that the brutal intimidation tactics were completely failing to break me, Chloe immediately switched her strategy. The savior persona vanished in an instant, replaced by the fragile victim. Her lower lip began to tremble, and tears welled up in her eyes. She let out a sob and covered her face with both of her hands. Marcus immediately rushed to her side, wrapping his arm around her shoulders and glaring at me. I just cannot believe you are doing this to me, Maya, Chloe cried, her voice shaking with distress. I have tried so hard to be accepted by this family. I try to use my privilege to help you all, but you just hate me. She looked up at Marcus, tears streaming down her cheeks. It is because I am white, is not it? She sobbed loudly. I am just trying to be a good ally and save a struggling African-American family from a terrible corporate landlord. And Maya is being racially hostile. She buried her face in Marcus, crying hysterically, while he shot me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, making me realize just how completely blind my brother really was. Marcus wrapped both of his arms around Chloe, pulling her tightly against his chest, as if I had just physically attacked her. He stroked her blonde hair and whispered apologies into her ear, completely validating her ridiculous victim narrative. Then he turned his head and glared at me with an intensity that genuinely shocked me. Look what you have done, Maya, he growled, his voice vibrating with absolute fury. She is bending over backwards using her own family resources to save our aunt from being thrown out onto the street, and you have the audacity to attack her character. You are sitting there hoarding your little savings account while my wife is out here doing the heavy lifting for our people. She is trying to be a genuine ally, and you are just throwing it right back in her face. You are a complete embarrassment to this family. Chloe sniffled loudly, burying her face deeper into his expensive dress shirt, but I could clearly see her peeking at me through her fingers. She was not crying at all. Her eyes were completely dry. She was just waiting for me to break under the pressure. She was waiting for the guilt to wash over me and force me into submission. Marcus pointed a rigid finger towards the massive oak front door. I am giving you an ultimatum right here and right now, he demanded. You are going to go to your bank first thing Monday morning and wire that $20,000 directly into the escrow account Chloe set up. If you do not send that money by noon, you are completely dead to me. Do not call my phone, do not come to my house, You will be permanently cut off from this entire family. Before I could even process his absurd threat, Aunt Kendra decided to pour gasoline on the fire. She saw Marcus laying down the law and realized this was her perfect opportunity to secure her free housing. She slammed her hand on the mahogany table again, drawing everyone's attention. If you do not wire that money, Maya, I am going to take you to civil court, she threatened, her voice shrill and desperate. I will hire a lawyer and sue you for severe emotional distress and elder abuse. I will tell the judge how you maliciously withheld funds that could have saved a senior citizen family member from sudden homelessness. I will legally drain every single penny you have until you are the one living on the street. You are not going to ruin my life just because you are a bitter, jealous little girl who refuses to help her own blood. I sat there listening to their unhinged demands and realized exactly what I was witnessing. They were not asking for a temporary favor. They were actively trying to extort me. They were using emotional manipulation, fake white tears, and entirely empty legal threats to rob me blind. They wanted to strip my children of their future just to protect a fraudulent real estate deal that was doomed to fail anyway. I looked at Marcus, the brother who was supposed to protect me, and realized he was nothing more than a willing pawn in his wife's financial scam. I looked at Aunt Kendra, the woman who stole my childhood trust fund, and realized she had not changed one bit in 20 years. They were completely clueless that they were threatening the very landlord who held Aunt Kendra's fate in her hands. I did not raise my voice. I did not engage in their pathetic screaming match. I simply pushed my heavy wooden chair back and stood up from the dinner table. Jaden and Lily stood up immediately, sensing the shift in my energy. They walked over and stood closely by my side, holding each other's hands. I picked up my purse and looked down at the three people who honestly believed they had just conquered me. Marcus was breathing heavily, his chest puffed out in false dominance. Aunt Kendra was smirking, thinking her ridiculous lawsuit threat had terrified me into compliance. And Chloe was still pretending to cry, waiting for her massive payday. I looked directly at my sister-in-law. Chloe, you can drop the theatrical act, I said, my voice echoing cleanly through the tense dining room. I am not giving you a single dime of my money to fund your fraudulent lifestyle. Chloe instantly stopped crying. She lowered her hands from her face and stared at me, her eyes wide with sudden panic. I stepped away from the table and guided my children toward the front hallway, refusing to listen to another word. Just before I walked out the front door, I turned around and looked back at the dining room. I locked eyes with Chloe one final time. You cannot even afford the catering for this dinner, Chloe. I said, my tone completely flat and devoid of any emotion. Stop playing Monopoly with real money. I turned the brass doorknob, walked out into the cool evening air, and let the heavy front door slam shut behind me. The drive home was quiet, but my mind was racing. Jaden and Lily fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the heavy tension they had just witnessed. I carried them inside, tucked them into their beds, and walked into my kitchen to pour a glass of water. Before I could even take a sip, my phone illuminated the dark room. The screen lit up with a rapid succession of notifications. It was not just text messages, it was Facebook alerts. I unlocked the screen and opened the app. Right at the top of my newsfeed was a massive post from Chloe. She had not wasted a single second after I walked out of her dining room. She had crafted a long, thoroughly calculated post designed to destroy my reputation within our social circle and our extended family. The post began with a heavily edited photo of her and Marcus smiling in front of their church. The caption below it was a masterpiece of manipulation. Chloe wrote about how incredibly difficult it is to be a loving ally to a marginalized family that refuses to accept genuine help. She claimed she had spent her entire weekend liquidating her own family assets just to save her struggling African American aunt from being evicted by a heartless corporation. She painted herself as a literal saint who was willing to sacrifice everything for her husband's relatives. Then she turned her sights directly on me. She did not use my name, but the implications were undeniable. She wrote that she had offered a beautiful financial lifeline to a deeply troubled and impoverished sister-in-law. She claimed she simply asked this person to contribute a tiny fraction of the cost to show family solidarity. Instead of gratitude, Chloe wrote she was met with pure hostility and reverse racism. She told her hundreds of followers that this sister-in-law had screamed at her, insulted her wealth, and stormed out of her home out of pure spite and jealousy. The comment section was already exploding with support for Chloe. Her wealthy friends were praising her for having such a big heart and telling her she did not deserve such toxic abuse from ungrateful people. But the real damage was happening in my text messages. Chloe had made sure to text a screenshot of her post to every single aunt, uncle, and cousin in our extended family network. My phone began vibrating aggressively as the judgment poured in. Cousin David sent a long message calling me an absolute disgrace to the family name. Aunt Sarah left a scathing voicemail telling me I was a complete failure of a mother for hoarding my pennies while Aunt Kendra faced homelessness. Even my great-uncle chimed in, saying I should be on my knees thanking God that Marcus found a woman willing to put up with our chaotic family. They all demanded that I apologize to Chloe and hand over the money immediately to prove I was not a bitter failure. I stood in the quiet darkness of my kitchen watching the notifications stack up. In the past, this kind of coordinated family attack would have broken me. I would have drafted a dozen different apologies trying to explain my side of the story to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. But tonight, I felt absolutely nothing but cold clarity. I did not type a single reply. I did not try to defend my name against people who valued a rich white lie over a poor black truth. I simply turned my phone on silent and walked into my home office feeling completely empowered. I opened my laptop and bypassed the social media drama entirely. It was time to initiate phase 2 of my plan. If Chloe was desperate enough to extort $20,000 from her sister-in-law to cover a fraudulent loan fee, she was definitely stealing from other places. And the most obvious target was my brother. Marcus owned a small but profitable logistics company. I knew for a fact he let Chloe manage the accounting because he thought her family background made her a financial genius. I opened my encrypted email client and drafted a new message to my lead corporate attorney. I instructed him to completely bypass Chloe and pull every piece of publicly available financial data on Marcus and his logistics business. I wanted a full forensic audit of his corporate filings, his business credit lines, and his tax liens. I told my lawyer to find out exactly who owned the debt on his company vehicles and his warehouse space. I hit send and closed the laptop. Chloe thought she was winning a petty family war on Facebook. She had no idea I was quietly preparing to dismantle her entire financial existence. Early Tuesday morning, my secure email chimed with an incoming message from my lead forensic accountant. I opened the encrypted file and immediately began reviewing the extensive audit of my brother Marcus and his logistics company. The financial destruction I was looking at was far worse than I had initially predicted. Chloe had not just mismanaged his business accounts, she had systematically and deliberately drained them completely dry. Using her position as his trusted bookkeeper, Chloe had secretly remortgaged his entire commercial warehouse space. She forged his signature on multiple high-interest corporate loans to extract maximum cash value from his logistics business. I tracked the outbound wire transfers and saw exactly where the money went. It did not go into investments or business expansion. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were funneled directly into her parents' private bank accounts to pay off their mounting country club debts and their luxury car leases. Marcus was completely broke. His company was effectively owned by a shadow bank, and he was sitting in his expensive house completely oblivious to his own financial ruin. He honestly believed he was a highly successful self-made CEO, while his wife was using his hard-earned business as a personal piggy bank to fund her parents' fake high society lifestyle. He had spent the last 5 years looking down on me for being a lowly administrative assistant, while his own corporate empire was entirely built on quicksand. I printed the devastating financial dossier and placed it carefully into a thick manila folder. I knew exactly when and where I was going to hand this explosive information over to my brother, but the timing had to be absolutely perfect. Meanwhile, the clock was aggressively ticking down on Aunt Kendra. There were exactly 15 days left before the county sheriff would arrive to enforce the 30-day eviction notice. The reality of her impending homelessness was finally starting to shatter her arrogant facade. Later that same afternoon, my cell phone rang. The caller ID displayed Aunt Kendra. I let it ring 3 times before I finally pressed the answer button. Maya, she barked into the receiver without offering any kind of polite greeting. This ridiculous corporate landlord is refusing to back down, and Chloe is dealing with some annoying banking delays regarding her purchase of the house. I need a solid backup plan right now. I sat back in my desk chair and waited for her to reveal her true intentions. Since you are the only one in the family who is not currently fighting this legal battle for me, you are going to let me move into your apartment, she demanded. Her voice carried that familiar tone of absolute authority, as if she were giving an order to a disobedient child. Now I know your place is small and probably in a terrible neighborhood, but I will just have to make do. You can have Jaden and Lily share a single bedroom so I can have the master suite. I expect you to have it completely cleaned out and ready for my boxes by the weekend. I listened to her incredibly entitled demands and felt a cold smile form on my face. She had spent the entire weekend publicly humiliating me on Facebook, calling me a failure and a disgrace to the family. Now she was demanding my master bedroom because her wealthy savior had completely failed her. I kept my voice perfectly even and remarkably calm. No, I said clearly. You are not moving in with me. Aunt Kendra gasped loudly into the receiver of her phone. What exactly did you just say to me? She practically spit the words through the speaker. I said no, I repeated. You are not stepping foot inside my home. You called me a bottom feeder. You told my children they should be ashamed of me. You and Chloe both made it perfectly clear that I am a disgrace to the Brooks family name, so you can figure out your own living situation without my help. I am not opening my door to someone who constantly disrespects me and my children. The silence on the other end of the line was incredibly heavy and deeply dangerous. When Aunt Kendra finally spoke, her voice had transformed into a frantic, unhinged shriek. You listen to me, you ungrateful little brat, she screamed, filled with venom. If you do not let me move into that apartment, and if you do not wire that $20,000 to Chloe immediately, I will make your life a living hell. I know exactly where Jaden and Lily go to school. If you refuse to help your own family, then I will just come to your kids' school and take them until you give me the money now. The line went completely dead as Aunt Kendra hung up the phone. She actually believed her threat would send me into a blind panic. She thought I would immediately call her back crying and begging her not to involve my children. Instead, I calmly locked my laptop, grabbed my car keys, and walked out of my office. As I rode the elevator down, I dialed the direct number for the principal at Jaden and Lily's school. Principal Higgins answered immediately. I informed him my estranged aunt had just made a direct threat to kidnap my children from his campus. I told him under no circumstances was Kendra Brooks allowed to check them out. I also requested the campus police officer be stationed inside the front office because my aunt was erratic and likely on her way. Principal Higgins assured me the school went into an immediate lockdown and my children were safe in his private office. I thanked him, climbed into my Honda, and drove straight toward the elementary school. I pulled into the visitor lot just 15 minutes later. Sure enough, Aunt Kendra's leased sedan was parked illegally in the fire lane right by the main entrance. She had driven like a maniac, completely consumed by her toxic desperation. I walked through the double glass doors and could instantly hear her shrill voice echoing down the hallway. I stepped into the administrative office and was greeted by a scene of absolute chaos. Aunt Kendra was leaning over the reception desk, slamming her manicured hands aggressively against the countertop. She was screaming, demanding that the school secretary page Jaden and Lily immediately. Principal Higgins stood firmly between her and the hallway, maintaining a strict posture. Behind them, sitting quietly in the waiting area, were half a dozen prominent PTA mothers. They were all clutching their designer handbags and staring at Aunt Kendra, completely appalled by her unhinged behavior. Aunt Kendra did not even notice me walk in. She yelled that she was their legal guardian and claimed there was a massive family emergency. She told the principal their mother was a completely incompetent failure who could not be trusted to handle a crisis. "I need my niece and nephew right now," she shrieked, her face turning bright red. "You are illegally keeping them from their own blood relative." I walked quietly past the horrified PTA mothers and stood right behind her. "Actually, Kendra, the only person doing anything illegal right now is you," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent office. Aunt Kendra whipped around so fast she nearly lost her balance. She pointed her finger directly at my face, ignoring the audience of parents completely. "Tell this ridiculous principal to release the kids to me right now," she yelled. "We are going back to your apartment and you are packing your things so I can move in. You owe me this." I did not argue with her. I simply looked past her and nodded at Officer Miller, the armed campus police officer, who had just stepped out from a side hallway. Officer Miller walked up to Aunt Kendra and stepped squarely between the two of us. He held a formal clipboard and looked at her with zero tolerance. "Ma'am, you need to step away from the desk right now," he instructed, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. Aunt Kendra scoffed. "You cannot tell me what to do," she spat. "This is family business." Officer Miller did not move an inch. "Actually, this is now a criminal matter," he corrected her. "The legal guardian of these students has explicitly barred you from this campus. You are causing a severe disturbance and attempting to take unauthorized custody of two minors." He handed her a yellow carbon copy paper. "This is a formal criminal trespassing warning. If you do not leave this property in exactly 30 seconds, you will be placed in handcuffs and transported to the county jail. If you return to this school, you will be arrested on site." The entire front office was dead silent. The PTA mothers were whispering to each other, covering their mouths in shock. Aunt Kendra looked down at the yellow paper. The reality of her situation finally pierced through her thick delusion. She looked around the room and saw the absolute disgust on the faces of the wealthy suburban mothers she usually tried so desperately to impress. She had humiliated herself in public. Her chest heaved as she crumpled the warning paper. She glared at me with pure hatred, but did not say another word. She turned around, pushed her way out the glass doors, and practically ran to her illegally parked car. I stood perfectly still, watching her drive away, knowing she had just sealed her own miserable fate. I returned to my office feeling a profound sense of peace. I knew Aunt Kendra would not quietly accept her public humiliation. She lived for revenge. As soon as she drove away from that school, she immediately called Chloe. I could easily imagine their frantic conversation. Kendra would have exaggerated the incident, claiming I traumatized her in front of the local mothers. Chloe, desperate for a distraction from her collapsing financial scams, would have eagerly taken the bait. They needed to punish me, and since they could not reach my children, they decided to target the one thing they thought gave me independence. They decided to destroy my livelihood. Our extended family had always believed I worked as a low-level receptionist at a boutique investment firm downtown. I intentionally kept my job title vague for years, letting them assume I spent my days answering phones and fetching coffee for wealthy executives. They had absolutely no idea that I was the founder and majority shareholder of that exact same firm. My administrative cover story was the perfect shield against their constant financial demands. Sitting at my mahogany desk, I was reviewing a commercial real estate contract when my office door gently opened. Marcus and Chloe were entirely wrong about my corporate environment. My firm did not operate on fear or intimidation. My team was fiercely loyal because I treated them with genuine respect. My lead operations manager, David, stepped into my office with a highly confused expression on his face. He was holding his wireless office phone against his chest as if trying to muffle a loud noise. "Maya, we have a very strange situation on line 1, David said, lowering his voice. "There is a woman named Chloe Brooks screaming at our receptionist. She is demanding to speak directly to the chief executive officer. She claims she has urgent criminal information regarding one of our administrative employees. She explicitly named you." I set my pen down on the desk and smiled. The sheer audacity of my sister-in-law never failed to amaze me. She actually thought she could get me fired from my own company. "Bring the phone in here, David," I instructed, "and put her on speaker. Let us hear exactly what criminal information she has uncovered." David walked over and placed the phone carefully in the center of my desk. He tapped the speaker button, and the shrill, frantic voice of my sister-in-law immediately filled my quiet office. Chloe was in the middle of a completely unhinged rant, playing her favorite role of the concerned wealthy citizen. "I am telling you this is a matter of severe corporate liability," she barked through the speaker. "I need to speak to whoever is in charge of your human resources department or your CEO immediately. You have a woman named Maya Brooks working at your front desk, and she is an active threat to your business." David looked at me, trying extremely hard to suppress a laugh. I gestured for him to respond. "This is the Director of Operations speaking," David said, maintaining perfect professional composure. "How can I help you, Mom?" Chloe let out a very dramatic sigh of relief. Finally, someone with some actual authority, she said, her tone dripping with arrogance. "Listen to me very carefully. I am a prominent member of this community, and I am calling to report a massive theft. Your employee, Maya Brooks, just stole $20,000 from my family. She manipulated an elderly relative and drained a shared savings account. We are currently filing a police report, but I felt it was my moral duty to warn your company before she steals from your corporate accounts." I leaned back in my chair, listening to Chloe weave her incredibly reckless web of lies. She was actively committing corporate slander and defamation, all while operating under the delusion of absolute power. She honestly believed that a single phone call from a supposed wealthy white woman would be enough to instantly terminate a black receptionist without any investigation. "She is highly unstable and deeply jealous of successful people," Chloe continued, her voice dripping with venom. "If you care about the financial security of your firm, you need to terminate her employment immediately. In fact, you should probably have security escort her out of the building today. I would hate for my family lawyer to have to subpoena your firm because you ignored this critical warning." David looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief at her sheer audacity. He muted the microphone for a brief second. "Do you want me to hang up on her right now?" he whispered. I shook my head and leaned closer to the phone. "Absolutely not," I replied very softly. "Tell her she is absolutely right." David locked eyes with me and gave a subtle nod. He took a deep breath, adjusting his voice to project the perfect amount of corporate alarm. "Ma'am, I want to personally thank you for bringing this incredibly serious matter to our attention," he said, sounding deeply concerned. "Our firm has a zero-tolerance policy for any form of financial misconduct or theft. Based on the severity of your allegations, we will be terminating Maya Brooks immediately. We will have building security clear out her desk and escort her off the premises within the hour. Your bravery in reporting this has potentially saved our firm from a massive disaster." Through the speaker, I could actually hear the smug satisfaction radiating from Chloe. "Well, I am just glad I could help," she replied, her voice practically singing with cruel delight. "It is always a tragedy when family turns out to be so toxic, but business is business. I expect you will handle this quietly so my family does not suffer any further embarrassment. Have a wonderful day." She ended the call with a sharp click. David reached over and ended the connection on his end. He looked up at me, completely baffled. "I cannot believe you just let her do that," he said, shaking his head. I just smiled and turned my attention back to my laptop. "She just handed me the perfect weapon, David," I replied. Now we just wait for the inevitable explosion. It did not even take 10 minutes. My cell phone buzzed violently across my desk, signaling a flurry of activity in the Brooks Family Blessings group chat. I unlocked the screen and watched Chloe take her grand victory lap. Great news, everyone, Chloe typed, adding several celebration emojis. I just received a call from Maya's employer. Apparently, they discovered she was stealing from the company and they fired her on the spot. Building security just threw her out. This is exactly what happens when you cross my family and try to steal from us. Karma is absolutely real. Aunt Kendra was the first person to reply, and her response was predictably vicious. She sent a string of laughing emojis. I knew it, Kendra typed. I knew she was a complete failure. Now she does not even have her pathetic little secretary job to fall back on. Good luck paying for your cheap apartment now, Maya. Maybe you should have been nicer to the people who were actually trying to help you. Marcus chimed in shortly after agreeing with both of them. He told the group that my termination was a long time coming and that I was finally getting exactly what I deserved for being so incredibly selfish. They spent the next 20 minutes absolutely tearing me apart, celebrating my supposed downfall. They believed they had successfully, completely ruined my life. They thought I was sitting in my car, crying over a cardboard box of office supplies. I let them enjoy their delusion until the notifications finally started to slow down. Then I began typing my response. I kept it incredibly brief and perfectly logical. Well, since I no longer have a job and my income has been completely terminated, I obviously will not be able to get a personal loan to help you out, I typed, hitting send, so the message dropped right into the middle of their hateful celebration. I guess I definitely cannot wire that $20,000 to you anymore, Chloe. Good luck buying Aunt Kendra's house without my money. You are going to need it. I watched the screen intently. The read receipts appeared instantly as everyone in the chat saw my message. Then the typing indicators stopped. The chat went completely dead. The utter silence was deafening. It took Chloe a full 5 minutes to process what had just happened. In her blind rage to destroy my reputation and assert her dominance, she had completely forgotten why she was harassing me in the first place. She needed my $20,000 in liquid cash to cover the fraudulent loan origination fees. By getting me fired or so, she thought she had successfully eliminated the only source of funding she had left to close her shady real estate deal. Her brilliant revenge tactic had just backfired and blown up her entire financial scheme. Suddenly, my phone started ringing. It was Chloe calling me directly. I did not answer. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then Marcus called. I ignored him too. Then Aunt Kendra called 3 times in a row, her panic clearly escalating with every single ring. I silenced my phone and tossed it into my purse. They had wanted to play a ruthless game, and I had just checkmated them using their own vicious strategy. I looked at David, who was still standing by the door, watching the silent drama unfold. Back to work, David, I said, pulling up my next contract. We have a real estate empire to run. I left the office at 5 o'clock sharp, leaving David to finalize the commercial lease agreements. I drove my 10-year-old Honda back to my modest 2-bedroom apartment. I deliberately kept this small apartment to maintain my cover story and keep my family from asking questions about my finances. Jaden and Lily were sitting at the kitchen table doing their homework while I started preparing dinner. The apartment was quiet and peaceful. That peace was violently shattered exactly 30 minutes later. Heavy, aggressive pounding echoed through the front hallway. Someone was slamming their fists against my front door so hard the wooden frame actually rattled. Jaden jumped up from his chair looking terrified. I calmly placed my hand on his shoulder and told him to stay in the kitchen with his sister. I walked down the short hallway, but I did not unlock the deadbolt. Instead, I pulled out my cell phone and opened my smart doorbell application. The high-definition camera feed appeared on my screen. Chloe was standing on my welcome mat looking completely deranged. Her designer hair was messy and her expensive makeup was visibly smudged under her eyes. She was hyperventilating, clutching her oversized leather purse against her chest. Maya, open this door right now, she screamed, kicking the bottom of the door with her expensive heels. I know you are in there. Her voice echoed loudly through the cheap apartment complex hallway, causing several of my neighbors to peek out of their windows. I did not open the door. I pressed the microphone icon on my phone screen. You need to step away from my door, Chloe, I said, my voice projecting clearly through the small speaker mounted outside. You are trespassing and you are scaring my children. Chloe scoffed loudly, leaning her face closer to the camera lens. Do not play the victim with me, Maya, she hissed. You are completely out of options. I got you fired today. You have absolutely no income and no way to support Jaden and Lily. If you do not wire that $20,000 to my account right this second, I am going to call Child Protective Services. I will tell them you are an unfit, unemployed mother living in a dangerous environment. I will have your children taken away by the state tonight. I stood in my hallway staring at my phone screen in absolute disbelief. Chloe was actually attempting to weaponize the foster care system just to extort my savings. She was threatening to rip my family apart because her own financial scam was collapsing. I pressed the microphone button again, keeping my voice deliberately flat to encourage her frantic rambling. Why do you even care about my savings account, Chloe? I asked, feigning helplessness. If you are so rich, why are you threatening to steal my children over $20,000? I thought you were buying Aunt Kendra a house with your family trust fund. My calculated question hit the exact nerve I was aiming for. The pressure of the impending loan deadline finally cracked her completely. Chloe threw her hands up in the air, her face twisted in pure, desperate panic. There is no trust fund, Maya, she screamed right into the camera microphone. My family is broke. I am broke. The shadow lender needs $20,000 in cash for the origination fees by tomorrow morning, or they will deny the subprime loan. If I do not get that house for Kendra, Marcus will start asking questions about where all his business money went. I need your money to cover my debts right now, or I am going to lose absolutely everything. The confession echoed through the quiet apartment hallway. She had just explicitly admitted to massive financial fraud, predatory lending, and aggressive extortion while staring directly into a high-definition recording device. She confessed that saving Aunt Kendra was nothing more than a desperate cover story to hide the fact that she had already bankrupted my brother. She admitted she was willing to destroy my family solely to protect her own fabricated wealthy image. I released the microphone button and did not say another word to her. Chloe stood on the porch for another 5 minutes, screaming empty threats and kicking the door a few more times. When she finally realized I was completely ignoring her, she stormed back to her leased luxury SUV and sped out of the parking lot. I stood in my hallway and tapped the save button on my security application. The entire unhinged extortion attempt was perfectly captured in crystal clear audio and video. I immediately opened my secure email client, attached the downloaded video file, and sent it directly to my lead corporate lawyer. I typed a very brief message telling him to add the footage to the impending civil and criminal lawsuits. Chloe had just handed me the final nail in her own financial coffin. The weekend passed quietly after Chloe threw her temper tantrum on my front porch. Monday morning arrived, bringing a new wave of chaos. There were exactly 7 days left until the county sheriff was scheduled to arrive at 910 Sycamore Lane to enforce the 30-day eviction notice. Aunt Kendra was finally running out of time, and she knew it. She had undoubtedly realized that Chloe was completely full of empty promises and was never going to buy that house. The reality of having nowhere to live and absolutely zero cash was driving her into a state of sheer panic. When my aunt panicked, she always resorted to her oldest and most destructive habits. I was sitting in my corporate office reviewing the civil lawsuit my lawyer had just finalized against Chloe when my desk phone rang. It was Greg, my senior property manager. He was the one who originally served the eviction notice to Kendra. I answered the phone and Greg immediately launched into his report. He sounded completely baffled by what he was witnessing. Maya, you are not going to believe what your tenant is doing right now, Greg said, his voice tight with disbelief. I decided to do a random drive-by inspection of the Sycamore property just to make sure she was not trashing the place before the eviction. I am sitting across the street in my truck right now. She has a moving van parked in the driveway, but she is not packing her clothes. She is wheeling the brand new stainless steel double-door refrigerator out the front door. I sat up straight in my chair, listening intently. Greg continued his report, explaining that another man was helping her load the expensive gas stove into the back of the rented van. She was not just moving out, she was actively stripping my property of its most valuable appliances and selling them for quick cash on the black market. This is classic Kendra Brooks behavior, I thought to myself. Greg sighed heavily through the phone and told me he had seen this exact scenario play out before. He explained that when he first ran her background check months ago, he noticed a long pattern of civil judgments from previous landlords. Aunt Kendra had a notorious history of destroying rental properties whenever she was asked to leave. She would wait until the very last minute, rip the copper wiring out of the walls, smash the bathroom mirrors, and flee in the middle of the night, leaving the owners with thousands of dollars in damages. She felt completely entitled to destroy what she could not control. Now, she was doing it to me. Greg asked me if he should quickly step out of his truck and confront her right now. He offered to call the local police department right then and there to stop the theft in progress. He said they could catch her red-handed with the stolen appliances loaded in the van and have her arrested for stealing property belonging to Apex Holdings. He was ready to shut her little operation down immediately. I looked out the large glass window of my office and thought about the incredible opportunity Aunt Kendra had just handed me. If Greg stopped her now, she would just play the victim again. She would cry to the police and claim it was all a big misunderstanding, or that she thought the appliances belonged to her. She would probably only get a slap on the wrist and a minor citation. I needed something much stronger. I needed a permanent and completely undeniable legal solution to her toxic behavior. I leaned into the phone and gave Greg a very specific set of instructions. "Do not get out of your truck, Greg," I told him, keeping my voice perfectly calm and collected. "Do not confront her, and absolutely do not call the police right now. Just stay hidden and take as many clear, high-definition photographs as you possibly can. Make sure you get the license plate number of the van and clear shots of the buyer's face." Greg hesitated for a second, clearly confused by my strategy. "But Maya, those appliances cost us over $4,000 to install?" he protested mildly. "If we let her drive away with them, she is going to sell them and keep the cash." I smiled, knowing exactly how the legal system worked. "That is exactly what I want her to do, Greg," I replied. "If you stop her now, it is just an attempted theft. But if we let her complete the sale and take the cash, it changes everything. Let her sell the appliances. That completely upgrades this from a standard civil eviction to a severe grand larceny felony theft charge right now." Greg stayed absolutely silent on the other end of the line for a moment, as the weight of my strategy finally sank in. "I understand completely," he finally replied, his voice filled with newfound respect. "I will sit right here in the truck and document every single second of this transaction. I will get clear photographs of her accepting the cash from the buyers, and I will send everything directly to your secure email by noon." I thanked him and hung up the phone. The trap was officially set, and Aunt Kendra had just walked right into it with her eyes wide open. Now I just had to wait for the perfect moment to spring it. That perfect moment presented itself the very next afternoon. It was Wednesday, and Marcus and Chloe were scheduled to host their extravagant 5th anniversary party that upcoming Saturday night. Through my forensic audit of my brother's logistics company, I already knew the grim reality behind this lavish event. Chloe had booked the grand ballroom at the most expensive luxury hotel downtown. She had hired a 12-piece live band, ordered thousands of dollars in imported floral arrangements, and secured a premium open bar. And she had paid for every single bit of it using a series of bad checks written from my brother's completely drained corporate accounts. The checks were scheduled to bounce entirely by Monday morning, but for Saturday night, she would still be able to play the role of the wealthy socialite. My cell phone buzzed on my desk, interrupting my corporate contract review. I looked down and saw a direct text message from Marcus. He was still trying to play the role of the dominant, protective husband, defending his fragile, wealthy wife. I am finalizing the security guest list for the hotel ballroom this weekend, he wrote, his tone dripping with unearned arrogance. Let me make this completely clear to you, Maya. You are officially banned from attending our anniversary party. Building security has your photo, and they will turn you away at the front doors. The only way I will allow you into the ballroom is if you show up with a sincere public apology for my wife and a cashier's check for $20,000. If you do not have the money, do not even bother showing up. You are a toxic presence in our lives right now. I read his pathetic ultimatum and could not help but smile. Marcus thought he was punishing me by excluding me from his fake high society gathering. He thought the threat of missing out on a major family event would finally break my resolve and force me to hand over my life savings. He had absolutely no idea that his anniversary party was the exact stage I needed to finalize my plan. I thought about the extensive guest list he and Chloe had curated. Chloe had invited all of her pretentious country club friends who still believed she was a wealthy heiress, living off a massive family trust fund. Aunt Kendra had invited all of her judgmental church friends so she could parade around and brag about her successful nephew and his incredibly rich white wife. Every single person who had ever looked down on me or judged my quiet lifestyle would be sitting in that grand ballroom, sipping stolen champagne. It was the absolute perfect audience for a massive public unmasking. I opened my heavy mahogany desk drawer and pulled out the thick manila folder containing the forensic financial audit of my brother's ruined logistics company. I placed the silver flash drive containing the doorbell camera footage of Chloe extorting me right next to it. I also included the signed police reports regarding the school incident. Then I printed the high-definition photographs Greg had just emailed me, showing Aunt Kendra illegally selling my stainless steel kitchen appliances for untraceable black market cash. I stacked all the damning evidence neatly together on my glass desk. I had the official foreclosure notices, the finalized eviction paperwork, and the irrefutable photographic proof of felony grand larceny. Everything was completely prepared and legally airtight. I picked up my phone to formulate my final reply. I did not argue with his ridiculous demands or beg him for a formal invitation to his fraudulent celebration. I typed my response with cold, deliberate precision, knowing it would completely blindside him. Do not worry, Marcus. I typed, my thumbs moving quickly across the bright digital keyboard. I will definitely be there on Saturday night. And you should probably tell your fancy hotel security to clear a wide path because I am bringing the secretive owner of Apex Holdings with me. I hit send and placed the phone face down. The grand stage was officially set for the execution. Saturday night arrived with a heavy downpour of rain, but inside the grand ballroom of the downtown luxury hotel, the atmosphere was completely electric. Marcus and Chloe had spared absolutely no expense for their fraudulent 5th anniversary celebration. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the massive room, illuminating the towering floral arrangements of imported white orchids that sat in the center of every single table. A 12-piece jazz band played upbeat melodies on a raised stage, while waiters in crisp white tuxedos circled the room carrying silver trays loaded with expensive champagne and artisan appetizers. It was the perfect illusion of generational wealth and limitless prosperity. Chloe was in her absolute element, playing the role of the gracious high society hostess. She was wearing a custom-tailored designer gown that easily cost $5,000, shimmering with intricate hand-stitched beadwork under the bright lights. She floated from table to table, holding a crystal flute of champagne, laughing loudly and accepting compliments from her pretentious country club friends. Marcus stood near the premium open bar wearing a velvet tuxedo jacket, puffing his chest out, and acting like the titan of industry he desperately pretended to be. Right in the middle of the room, Aunt Kendra was holding court at a large VIP table, surrounded by her entire church congregation and all of our judgmental extended family members. She was wearing a flashy silver dress, and speaking loud enough for half the ballroom to hear. She was waving her hands dramatically, completely dominating the conversation. She was bragging about how her incredibly successful nephew Marcus and his wealthy angel of a wife Chloe were currently in the process of buying her a massive new house. She told everyone at the table that they were paying in pure cash just to rescue her from a terrible corporate landlord. She made sure to casually mention how sad it was that her own niece Maya was such a bitter and jealous failure who refused to help her own blood. The church ladies nodded in deep sympathy, taking sips of their stolen champagne and whispering about my supposed downfall. I stood in the carpeted hallway just outside the massive double mahogany doors of the ballroom. I was not wearing my cheap administrative assistant clothes or the faded sweaters my family was so used to seeing me in. I was wearing a sharp, perfectly tailored charcoal gray Tom Ford power suit paired with sleek black stilettos. I felt absolutely invincible. Standing directly to my right was my lead corporate attorney, holding a thick leather briefcase containing the forensic financial audit and the eviction paperwork. Standing to my left was a fully uniformed county sheriff, whose presence commanded immediate and absolute authority. I placed my hands on the cool brass handles of the heavy ballroom doors and pushed them open. The heavy wooden doors swung wide with a loud echoing thud that instantly drew the attention of the guests standing near the entrance. I stepped into the bright golden light of the ballroom, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor of the entryway. My lawyer and the sheriff stepped in right behind me, creating a massive wall of undeniable legal power. The jazz band was in the middle of a lively song, but the trumpet player noticed the uniformed police officer walking into the room and slowly stopped playing. The piano player faltered, and within seconds the live music completely died out. The sudden, overwhelming silence rippled through the massive ballroom like a physical shockwave. Hundreds of guests turned their heads to see what had caused the interruption. The crowd slowly parted, creating a wide open path straight down the center of the room. Aunt Kendra stopped her bragging mid-sentence, her jaw dropping wide open as she stared at my tailored suit and the armed officer standing firmly by my side. Marcus nearly dropped his glass of bourbon, his eyes darting frantically between me and the sheriff. But my sister-in-law Chloe reacted exactly as I knew she would. The sight of me crashing her perfect illusion triggered an immediate and volatile rage. She slammed her champagne flute down onto a nearby cocktail table, spilling expensive alcohol across the white linen cloth. Her face turned a bright, furious shade of crimson as she stomped down the center aisle of the ballroom, pushing past her wealthy friends. She stopped just a few feet away from me, her chest heaving with absolute fury. She pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "I told you that you were permanently banned from this party," she screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings and completely shattering her elegant high society persona. "Security, get her out of here right this minute before I do." I did not even blink at her frantic and completely unhinged screaming. I completely ignored Chloe entirely. I kept my eyes locked directly on my brother Marcus, who stood paralyzed by the sudden intrusion. I walked right past Chloe, leaving her standing in the wide aisle, pointing at empty space. I stopped directly in front of Marcus. He looked down at my expensive tailored suit, and then up at the uniformed sheriff standing firmly behind my left shoulder. "Maya, what is going on here?" Marcus stammered, his voice shaking as he desperately tried to maintain his authoritative posture in front of his wealthy guests. "What are you doing here with the police?" I did not answer his question with an apology or an explanation. Instead, I gave a subtle nod to my lead corporate attorney. The lawyer stepped forward, unlatched his heavy leather briefcase, and pulled out the thick manila folder containing the forensic financial audit. He handed the heavy stack of legal documents directly to my brother. Marcus took the folder, his hands trembling slightly as the sheer weight of the paper settled into his palms. The entire ballroom was completely silent, waiting for my next move. "Marcus, meet the secretive owner of Apex Holdings," I said, my voice projecting clearly and loudly enough for every single person in the massive room to hear. "Me. I am the corporate landlord you have been cursing all month, and the document you are holding in your hands right now is the official notice of foreclosure on your entire logistics business. A collective gasp rippled loudly through the massive crowd. Aunt Kendra stood up from her VIP table, knocking her chair backward in pure shock. Marcus stared at me as if I had just spoken to him in a foreign language. He shook his head in denial, clutching the heavy folder against his chest. "That is impossible," he whispered, his voice cracking. "My business is highly profitable. We just had our best quarter yet. Chloe handles all the accounting, and we are completely flush with cash." I looked at him with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. "Open the folder, Marcus," I instructed, my tone completely uncompromising. "Open it and look at exactly what your incredibly wealthy wife has been doing with your hard-earned corporate funds for the past 3 years." Marcus slowly opened the heavy manila cover. The very first page was a summary of his primary business checking account. His eyes widened as he saw the current balance was absolutely zero. He frantically flipped to the next page, which detailed a massive high-interest subprime commercial loan taken out against his warehouse property. He stared at the signature line at the bottom of the contract. "I did not sign this." Marcus gasped, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "This is not my signature. Someone forged my name." I pointed to the next stack of documents in his hands. "Keep looking," I said calmly. "Look at the outgoing wire transfers." Marcus flipped through the bank statements, his face turning an alarming shade of gray. He read the transaction histories out loud, his voice barely a whisper. $50,000 transferred to the Oak Ridge Country Club. $30,000 transferred to a luxury car leasing dealership. $80,000 transferred directly into a private offshore account registered to Chloe's parents. He looked up from the papers, his eyes completely hollow and utterly broken. She drained everything. Marcus realized the devastating truth finally crashing down on him. She secretly remortgaged my entire company and stole all of my money to pay off her parents' massive debts. I am completely bankrupt. Chloe suddenly realized exactly what was happening. Her fake outrage evaporated instantly, replaced by pure animalistic panic. She lunged forward, trying to snatch the heavy folder out of Marcus's hands. "Do not look at those papers!" she shrieked, desperately clawing at his velvet tuxedo jacket. "They are fake, Marcus. Maya fabricated all of these documents because she is jealous of our success. She is just trying to destroy our beautiful marriage." Marcus did not let her take the folder. Instead, he shoved her hands away with such force that she stumbled backward, hitting the edge of a cocktail table. The crystal glasses on the table shattered loudly against the marble floor, spilling expensive champagne everywhere. This harsh noise mirrored the complete destruction of his fabricated reality. He looked at the woman he had worshipped for 5 years, the woman he believed was his golden ticket to high society. He finally saw her for exactly what she was: a desperate, manipulative fraud who had systematically destroyed his entire financial life and completely bankrupted his hard-earned logistics business just to maintain a pathetic, hollow illusion of generational wealth that never actually existed. Chloe stood completely frozen as the heavy folders slipped from Marcus' hands and scattered across the cold marble floor. All the color instantly drained from her perfectly contoured face, leaving her looking pale and terrified. She looked around this massive ballroom and saw hundreds of eyes staring directly at her. Her wealthy country club friends were aggressively whispering behind their hands. The church ladies were clutching their pearls in absolute shock and horror. Chloe realized she had entirely lost control of her husband and her fabricated narrative, so she instinctively reached for the only weapon she had left: her privilege. She straightened her posture, smoothed her expensive designer gown, and abruptly turned her attention away from Marcus. She marched directly toward the uniformed county sheriff, standing just behind my left shoulder, acting as if she were the highest authority in the room. "Officer, I demand that you arrest this woman immediately," Chloe shrieked, pointing an aggressive finger right at my chest. "She is violently trespassing on a private event and severely harassing my family. I am the host of this exclusive party, and I want her removed in handcuffs right now. Do you know who my parents are? The sheriff did not even blink. He looked down at Chloe with an expression of absolute utter boredom and crossed his arms over his chest. He knew exactly who I was, and he knew exactly why we were there. Ma'am, you are currently standing in a hotel ballroom rented with fraudulent funds, he stated, his voice booming with undeniable authority. My official advice to you is to remain completely silent before you incriminate yourself any further. Chloe gasped, stepping backward as if she had just been physically slapped across the face. The harsh realization that her privilege held absolutely zero power against documented financial crimes finally hit her hard. I stepped forward, completely closing the distance between us. I made sure my voice carried clearly across the silent ballroom so every single guest could hear the undeniable truth. You never had any intention of saving Aunt Kendra from being evicted, I said, staring directly into her panicked eyes. Your entire white savior routine was nothing but a desperate smokescreen. You wanted everyone to think you were this incredibly generous, wealthy woman swooping in to rescue your poor black relatives. But the reality is that your family trust fund has been completely empty for years. You were trying to secure a highly illegal subprime loan just to keep up appearances, and you did not even have the cash to cover the basic origination fees. You looked at the family you married into and saw nothing but an easy target to exploit for your own survival. Chloe shook her head frantically, trying to back away, but there was nowhere for her to go. I kept pushing the truth forward, dismantling her entire public persona piece by piece. You tried to extort $20,000 from me, I announced loud enough for the entire VIP table to hear. You threatened to call Child Protective Services and have my children taken away if I did not drain their college savings account and hand the cash over to you. You were perfectly willing to destroy my family and steal my children's future just to cover up the massive fraud you committed against my brother. You are not a savior, Chloe. You are a complete parasite masquerading as a philanthropist. The silence in the ballroom was suddenly broken by a sharp, loud gasp from the center of the room. I turned my head and saw Aunt Kendra standing perfectly still by the VIP table. The smug, arrogant expression she had worn all evening had completely vanished. Her brain was finally processing the massive implications of my speech. She looked at Chloe and then looked down at the scattered foreclosure documents on the floor. The horrifying truth finally registered in her mind. Chloe had absolutely no money. The trust fund was entirely fake. And most importantly, Chloe was never going to buy that house on Sycamore Lane. The grand rescue plan was a total lie. Aunt Kendra realized she was actually going to be homeless in just a few short days. The sheer panic and absolute unbridled rage that washed over her face was truly terrifying to witness in person. She stepped away from the stunned church ladies and marched straight toward Chloe. Her eyes were wide and wild with uncontrollable fury. You lied to me! Aunt Kendra screamed, her shrill voice completely shattering the remaining tension in the massive room. You promised me a new house, you worthless little liar. She lunged forward with both hands completely outstretched, turning on her favorite wealthy niece-in-law like a rabid dog right in the middle of the dance floor. Marcus grabbed Aunt Kendra by the shoulders and pulled her away from his terrified wife. Aunt Kendra was panting heavily, her silver dress shifting awkwardly around her frame. She looked back and forth between the ruined financial documents scattered across the floor and the tailored designer suit I was wearing. You could actually see the gears turning in her panicked mind. If Chloe was completely broke and the family trust fund was nothing but a massive lie, then the only person who had the power to save her from living on the streets was standing right in front of her. She instantly dropped her aggressive posture and smoothed down her messy hair. A wide, fake smile stretched across her face, completely replacing the rabid fury from just seconds before. She walked away from Marcus and Chloe and hurried directly toward me, pushing past a stunned waiter who was trying to clean up the shattered glass from the cocktail table. Maya, baby, she said, her voice suddenly dripping with thick, sugary sweetness. You own the house. You are the secretive owner of the corporate landlord company. Oh, thank God. The Lord truly works in mysterious ways. She reached out eagerly, trying to grab both of my hands, but I took a deliberate step backward, refusing to let her touch me. She let her hands fall awkwardly to her sides, but kept the fake smile plastered firmly on her face. "This is actually wonderful news, Maya," she continued, completely ignoring the fact that she had just spent the entire evening insulting me to everyone in the room. "You can just cancel that ridiculous eviction notice right now. You can just let your favorite auntie stay in the house for free, right? We are blood, and family always takes care of family." I stood perfectly still, letting her pathetic manipulative plea hang in the silent air of the grand ballroom. I looked around at the VIP table where the church ladies had just been laughing at my supposed downfall. They were staring at Aunt Kendra with pure disgust, finally seeing her absolute hypocrisy on full public display. I turned my attention back to the woman who had stolen my childhood trust fund and actively tried to extort my young children. I looked Aunt Kendra dead in her eyes, my expression completely devoid of any sympathy or forgiveness. "You called me a complete failure," I said, my voice steady and painfully clear, echoing through the quiet space. "You stood in front of my 10-year-old son and my 8-year-old daughter, and you told them they should be completely ashamed of their mother. You told them I was a worthless bottom feeder. You told them not to end up like me." Aunt Kendra swallowed hard, her fake smile trembling slightly at the edges as her charm offensive completely failed. "Oh, Maya, I was just upset," she stammered, desperately trying to backtrack and rewrite history. "You know I did not mean any of those cruel things. I was just stressed about the housing situation. I am your aunt. I raised you when your parents were struggling. You cannot just leave me out in the cold street like a stray dog." I leaned slightly forward. "You were right about one thing, Kendra," I replied, my voice dropping into a sharp, clinical tone. "My children will not end up like me, because they will never have to endure the financial abuse and emotional manipulation that you inflicted on me for 20 years. They will grow up knowing exactly how to establish firm boundaries and how to cut toxic parasites entirely out of their lives without feeling a single ounce of guilt." I stood up straight and gave a firm, deliberate nod to the uniformed county sheriff standing directly beside me. The sheriff stepped forward, bypassing me entirely, and walked right up to Aunt Kendra. He reached into his dark uniform pocket and pulled out a freshly printed, legally binding document. It was not the standard 30-day notice she had received earlier in the month. It was a customized, finalized writ of possession signed directly by the county judge that very morning. He handed the crisp white paper directly to my aunt. Aunt Kendra stared down at the legal document, her hands shaking violently. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice cracking with genuine terror as she read the bold black lettering at the top of the page. The sheriff looked at her with zero sympathy. "That is an emergency court order of possession, ma'am," he stated loudly enough for the entire crowd to witness the execution of justice. "Because the property owner provided documented proof of you illegally selling the kitchen appliances, the court granted an expedited removal. You do not have 15 days anymore. You have exactly 2 hours to get your personal belongings out of my property. Tonight." The words hung in the air, but Aunt Kendra refused to carry them. She stared at the crisp white paper for 3 seconds before her demeanor shattered into hysterics. "No," she screamed, tearing the legal document into pieces and throwing the shredded paper onto the marble floor. "You are an absolute demon sent straight from hell to destroy this family." She began pacing the dance floor, waving her arms frantically like a trapped animal. "I am not leaving this party, and I am certainly not leaving that house," she yelled. "You cannot kick a senior citizen out into the rain. I have tenant rights, and I will drag this out in civil court for years until you are bankrupt." She stomped her silver heels against the floor, throwing a tantrum that rivaled a spoiled toddler. She demanded that Marcus do something to protect her, but my brother was staring blankly at his foreclosure documents. He was paralyzed by the crushing reality of his financial ruin and did not even look up. The county sheriff took a step forward, resting his hand on his utility belt. "Ma'am, tearing up a court order does not magically void the signature of a judge," he stated, his voice booming with authority. "If you refuse to vacate the premises tonight, My deputies will physically remove you, and all your belongings will be dragged to the public curb." Aunt Kendra backed away from the officer and turned toward her VIP table, desperately seeking validation from her church congregation. "Do you see what this wicked girl is doing to me?" she cried, pointing an accusing finger at my face. "She is throwing her own blood out onto the street. Pray for her soul, because she is filled with pure evil." The church ladies shifted uncomfortably, refusing to make eye contact. The fragile illusion was breaking, and nobody wanted to be associated with the screaming, frantic woman in the silver dress. I watched her desperately try to cling to her fake righteous persona and decided it was finally time to drop the hammer. I stepped past the scattered pieces of the torn court order and looked her dead in the eye. "You really want to stand in front of your entire church congregation and talk about sin, Kendra?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, lethal volume that forced the room to lean in just to hear me. "You want to talk about the law and your tenant rights. Fine. Let us talk about what happened yesterday afternoon at 910 Sycamore Lane." Aunt Kendra suddenly stopped pacing. Her chest heaved rapidly, but her shrill screaming abruptly died in her throat. "If you do not leave this hotel quietly right now and vacate my property before midnight, I will not just evict you." I continued projecting my voice so every person at her VIP table could hear the undeniable truth. "I will immediately press criminal charges against you for the $4,000 worth of stainless steel kitchen appliances you illegally ripped out of my property and sold for black market cash yesterday." Aunt Kendra actually choked on her breath, taking a trembling step backward. I did not stop. My property manager sat in his truck across the street and photographed the transaction, I said relentlessly. "We have high-definition pictures of you loading my refrigerator and my gas stove into a rented moving van. We have pictures of you accepting the thick envelope of cash. We have the license plate number of the buyers, and we have your felony operation recorded on camera." Aunt Kendra completely froze. Her body went entirely rigid as if struck by lightning. The blood drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and hollow under the crystal chandeliers. The absolute silence in the grand ballroom was broken by a series of loud, horrified gasps coming directly from the VIP table. The head of the church choir clamped her hand over her mouth. Another church elder shook her head in pure disgust, whispering the words "grand larceny" and "felony theft" to the woman sitting next to her. The righteous victim narrative that Aunt Kendra spent her adult life cultivating was obliterated in seconds. She was no longer a struggling senior citizen, oppressed by a wealthy niece. She was a documented thief, caught red-handed stealing from her own family. Her social standing within the community, her pristine church reputation, and her entire fabricated identity were destroyed in front of a captive audience. She looked frantically around the room, but there was absolutely no sympathy left anywhere. Every single face staring back at her was filled with absolute revulsion. She opened her mouth to speak, to deny the allegations or deflect the blame, but no words came out. She was completely socially destroyed. The absolute destruction of Aunt Kendra was so utterly captivating that almost nobody noticed my sister-in-law trying to make a quiet escape. Chloe was silently backing away from the scattered financial documents still lying on the cold marble floor. She kept her head down, hoping the crowd of horrified church ladies and disgusted country club friends would keep their attention securely locked on the screaming senior citizen. She grabbed her expensive designer clutch purse from a nearby table and started power walking toward the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom. She just wanted to disappear into the rainy night and escape the massive public humiliation she had completely brought upon herself. But she did not even make it to the carpeted hallway. Just as her hand reached for the shiny brass door handle, the heavy wooden door swung open from the outside. The general manager of the luxury hotel stepped directly into her path. He was flanked by two large hotel security guards wearing transparent earpieces and matching dark suits. The manager held a black leather folio in his hands, and his expression was completely rigid. "Excuse me, Mrs. Brooks," he said, his voice entirely devoid of the polite customer service warmth he had displayed earlier in the evening. "We have a very serious financial problem that requires your immediate attention." Chloe tried to frantically push past him, insisting she had a severe family emergency that required her to leave the premises right now. But the two security guards simply stepped closer, forming an impenetrable physical wall blocking the only exit. "Your payment method for tonight has been completely declined," the manager stated loudly, his voice carrying over the dying murmurs of the stunned crowd. "The primary corporate credit card you put on file for the $15,000 catering and ballroom rental fee was just flagged for severe financial fraud. The issuing bank has completely frozen the account." Chloe gasped loudly, her perfect face turning a sickly, translucent shade of white. She frantically dug her manicured nails into her clutch and pulled out two more platinum credit cards. She shoved them aggressively toward the hotel manager, demanding he run them through the system immediately. But I already knew exactly what the outcome was going to be. My forensic accounting team at Apex Holdings had officially submitted the commercial fraud paperwork to the banking authorities just 1 hour before this lavish anniversary party even started. Every single financial account tied to my brother's ruined logistics company, including the illegal shadow accounts Chloe had secretly opened, was entirely frozen pending a massive federal fraud investigation. The manager handed the platinum cards to a waiting assistant who quickly ran them through a wireless mobile terminal. "Decline," the assistant announced, shaking his head firmly. "Both of them are completely locked." The manager crossed his arms and looked down at my trembling sister-in-law. "Ma'am, you and your guests have already consumed $15,000 worth of premium imported alcohol and gourmet catering," he said, his tone turning incredibly icy and uncompromising. "If you cannot produce a valid and legal form of payment right this second, I am legally obligated to consider this a massive theft of services. I will have no choice but to hand you directly over to the local authorities." Chloe panicked, looking back toward the center of the massive dance floor. Marcus was still standing exactly where I left him, staring blankly at the foreclosure notices, completely broken and financially empty. He had absolutely zero money left to save her. Aunt Kendra was currently being forcefully escorted toward the service elevator by the county sheriff deputies, still screaming hysterically about her imaginary tenant rights. Chloe was entirely alone, trapped by her own intricate web of financial lies and desperate extortion. I adjusted my tailored suit jacket and slowly walked toward the grand ballroom exit. The remaining crowd parted for me once again, offering nothing but silent awe and respect for the woman who had just systematically dismantled an entire fake empire in under 10 minutes. I walked right up to the heavy mahogany doors where Chloe was currently being surrounded by angry hotel security and the local police officers who had just arrived to take the hotel manager's formal theft report. Chloe looked at me, her eyes filled with absolute terror and desperate, pathetic pleading. I did not stop walking. I simply leaned in close as I passed her trembling shoulder. "Have a happy anniversary, Chloe," I whispered, my voice smooth and perfectly calm. I walked out of the grand ballroom, leaving the chaos entirely behind me. The heavy doors closed, shutting out the frantic sound of police officers beginning their formal questioning. I stepped out into the cool, rainy night, feeling incredibly free. The cool, rainy night gave way to a crisp and brightly lit Sunday morning. I woke up in my own bed feeling a profound sense of lightness that I had not experienced in decades. For the very first time in my entire adult life, I did not have the heavy, suffocating weight of my toxic family pressing down on my chest. I poured myself a hot cup of black coffee, kissed Jaden and Lily, who were happily eating cereal and watching morning cartoons, and grabbed my car keys from the kitchen counter. I needed to see the final result of the eviction with my own two eyes to truly process that it was over. I drove my 10-year-old Honda Civic through the quiet suburban streets toward 910 Sycamore Lane. The heavy storm from the previous night had washed the neighborhood completely clean, leaving the pavement looking vibrant and renewed under the bright morning sun. As I slowly turned the corner onto Sycamore Lane, I saw her immediately. Aunt Kendra was sitting directly on the wet concrete curb at the very edge of the driveway. She was still wearing the same flashy silver designer dress from the anniversary party, though it was now severely wrinkled and heavily stained with dark mud from the damp pavement. Surrounding her on the wet grass were half a dozen cheap black plastic garbage bags. They were bulging awkwardly with whatever clothes and personal items she had frantically managed to stuff inside before the sheriff deputies forced her out the door. I pulled my car up to the curb and put the transmission into park. I looked up at the front door of my property. The morning sun glinted brightly off the brand new shiny brass deadbolt my property manager had installed just hours earlier. The house was finally secure and completely mine again. I stepped out of my car and closed the door with a solid thud. The sudden noise made Aunt Kendra jump violently. She looked up, and her exhausted, bloodshot eyes locked onto me. I expected her to start screaming insults again, or throwing another vicious tantrum, but her arrogant spirit was completely broken. The sheer brutal reality of her situation had finally crushed her toxic pride into dust. She struggled to stand up, her knees shaking and her joints stiff from spending the entire night sitting outside on the cold concrete curb. "Maya," she whispered, her voice hoarse and trembling uncontrollably. She stumbled forward, wrapping her arms tightly around her own chest, as if trying to hold herself together. "Please, Maya, you have to help me right now. I have been sitting out here shivering for 10 hours straight. I called Marcus over 20 times, but his phone is completely disconnected. I called Chloe repeatedly, and she sent every single call straight to voicemail. I have absolutely nowhere else to go and nobody else to call." She let out a loud, pathetic sob, burying her face in her manicured hands. "You cannot do this to me, Maya. I am your family. Blood is thicker than water. You have to remember that. We are blood. You cannot just leave your own flesh and blood to rot out here on the side of the road like garbage." I stood firmly on the sidewalk, keeping a very safe and deliberate physical distance between us. I looked at the pathetic, miserable woman crying uncontrollably in front of me and felt absolutely nothing. There was no lingering pity. There was no heavy guilt. There was absolutely no lingering sense of familial obligation. "You always loved using that specific phrase, Kendra," I said, my voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of any emotion. "Blood is thicker than water. But you only ever used it as a manipulative weapon against me. You used it as a convenient excuse to steal my childhood trust fund. You used it to justify belittling me publicly in front of my own young children. You used it to aggressively demand my hard-earned savings so your wealthy white savior could fund her completely fake lifestyle. You only ever remembered that we were blood when you desperately needed someone to bleed dry." Aunt Kendra reached a shaking, desperate hand out toward me, tears streaming heavily down her ruined makeup. "Maya, please, I am begging you on my knees," she sobbed openly. "Just let me inside the house, just for 1 week so I can figure things out. I will do absolutely anything you ask me to do." I opened my small leather purse and reached inside. I bypassed my car keys and my cell phone, pulling out a single crisp $100 bill. I held it out toward her. She stared at the green money, her eyes widening with a sudden flash of desperate, pathetic hope. She reached out and snatched the bill quickly from my fingers, clutching it tightly to her chest. I looked her dead in the eyes, making sure she understood the absolute, undeniable finality of this exact moment. "Buy a bus ticket," I instructed, my voice dropping to a cold, authoritative whisper. "I do not care where you go, but you need to leave this town today. And do not ever contact me or my children again." I turned around, climbed into my car, and drove away without looking back. A full week passed since I drove away from that curb, leaving Aunt Kendra sitting in the damp grass with her garbage bags. In those 7 days, my life transitioned into a state of beautiful, uninterrupted peace. I was sitting at my large mahogany desk in the executive suite of Apex Holdings, looking out over the downtown skyline. I was currently reviewing the final acquisition papers for a new commercial plaza when the intercom on my desk buzzed softly. My receptionist informed me that I had an unscheduled visitor waiting down in the main lobby. She sounded highly skeptical, stating that the man looked incredibly disheveled and claimed to be my older brother. I took a deep breath and told her to send him up to my office. I knew this specific confrontation was absolutely inevitable. 10 minutes later, the heavy glass doors of my office slowly pushed open. Marcus stepped inside, and the physical transformation he had undergone in just one single week was genuinely shocking. He was no longer wearing his expensive velvet tuxedo jackets or carrying himself with that arrogant, puffed-out chest. He was wearing a wrinkled gray sweater and faded jeans. His shoulders were completely slumped. His face was deeply lined with dark, heavy bags under his bloodshot eyes, and he looked entirely broken. He stood frozen near the doorway, staring at the massive corner office, the expensive leather furniture, and the panoramic view of the city. He was finally seeing the actual reality of the sister he had spent years mocking and dismissing as a worthless secretary. Maya, he started, his voice cracking immediately as he slowly walked toward my desk. I really need to talk to you. I did not stand up to greet him, and I did not offer him a seat. I simply closed my laptop and waited for him to speak. He stood awkwardly in front of my desk, wringing his hands together like a nervous child. I filed for divorce from Chloe yesterday morning, he admitted, staring down at the polished wood of my desk. The federal authorities officially seized everything. The logistics business is entirely gone. The bank took the house, the cars, and even my personal checking accounts. Chloe is facing massive federal wire fraud charges, and she completely threw me under the bus, claiming I knew about everything. I am officially bankrupt, Maya. I have absolutely nothing left to my name. I sat perfectly still, listening to the tragic collapse of his fake empire. I am truly sorry that your marriage turned out to be a massive financial scam, Marcus, I said, keeping my voice entirely professional. But what exactly do you expect me to do about it? Marcus looked up at me, his eyes filling with desperate tears. I need a job, Maya, he pleaded, his voice vibrating with absolute desperation. You own this entire private equity firm. You have millions of dollars in liquid assets. You could easily hire me as an executive consultant or a logistics director. Or you could just give me a personal loan. Just enough cash to hire a decent defense attorney and get a small apartment. Please, Maya, I am your older brother. I am begging you to save me. I looked at him and felt a deep wave of pure disgust. You want me to save you? I asked, my tone dropping into a cold, harsh register. You stood in the middle of a family barbecue and laughed while Aunt Kendra pointed at my car and told my young children that their mother was a worthless bottom feeder. You sat at your expensive dining room table and demanded that I drain my children's college savings account to fund your wife's fraudulent lifestyle. You aggressively threatened to permanently cut me out of the family if I did not hand over $20,000 by Monday morning. You watched your wife and your aunt verbally abuse me for years, and you never defended me once. You actually joined them because it made you feel powerful. Marcus shook his head frantically, tears spilling down his face. I was completely brainwashed, Maya, he cried, stepping closer to the desk. Chloe manipulated me. I did not know she was broke. You cannot just hold that against me forever. You are my sister. You are being completely cold-hearted and cruel right now. I reached across my desk and pressed the security button on my telephone console. I looked directly into his desperate, tear-filled eyes. I am not cold, Marcus, I replied, my voice completely steady and brutally honest. I am just mirroring the exact energy you gave me when you thought I was poor. The glass doors behind him opened as two large security guards stepped into the office. Escort this man out of the building, I ordered, and make sure he never gets past the lobby again. I opened my laptop and went back to work as they grabbed his arms. The heavy glass doors closed with a soft click, shutting out Marcus and his pathetic pleas for mercy. I did not look up from my laptop screen as the security guards marched him to the elevators. Word of that swift and absolute rejection spread through our extended family like wildfire. Over the next few months, the gossip network that had once been used to completely tear me down became the very instrument of my vindication. I did not have to lift a single finger or make a single phone call to find out what happened to the people who had tried to destroy me. The remaining cousins and distant aunts who had previously worshipped Chloe were suddenly falling over themselves to text me every single miserable detail of her catastrophic downfall. They were desperately trying to get on my good side now that they knew I was a millionaire, but I simply left all their messages on read. The federal authorities had indeed moved swiftly. Chloe was officially indicted on multiple counts of federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft for forging Marcus on those subprime commercial loans. Her flashy downtown defense attorney dropped her the exact second her fraudulent credit cards declined his massive retainer fee. She was assigned a deeply overworked public defender who immediately advised her to prepare for a lengthy prison sentence. Because her parents were entirely complicit in receiving the stolen corporate funds, their heavily mortgaged estate was seized by the bank. The glorious generational wealth she loved to brag about evaporated overnight, leaving her parents completely destitute. They were forced to rent a tiny rundown house on the industrial edge of the city. Chloe, once the shimmering high society hostess of grand hotel ballrooms, was currently living in their damp, unfinished basement wearing a bulky federal ankle monitor pending her criminal trial. Her country club friends completely erased her from their social circles, deleting every photograph of her from their social media profiles as if she had never even existed. She was entirely alone, facing the terrifying reality of federal prison with absolutely no money to buy her way out. Aunt Kendra suffered a different kind of imprisonment. She was not facing federal time, but her social execution was absolute and permanent. The public humiliation she endured at the anniversary party completely destroyed her carefully crafted identity. The ladies at her church congregation, the very women she had tried to impress by throwing me under the bus, officially ostracized her. They whispered constantly about her felony theft of my kitchen appliances, refusing to sit near her in the pews, and completely ignoring her daily phone calls. Stripped of her captive audience and her fake righteous authority, she had absolutely nothing left to fall back on. With no money and a freshly ruined rental history, she was forced to move into a cramped, rusted trailer park 2 entire towns over. I heard through Cousin David that she spent her days sitting on a sagging wooden porch, glaring at her new neighbors and bitterly complaining about how her ungrateful family had abandoned her. The bitter irony was that her new trailer did not even have a working stove. She was finally living the exact miserable bottom-feeder lifestyle she had so confidently predicted for my future. As for Marcus, he was currently working the overnight shift at a local distribution center, ironically loading heavy cardboard boxes for a logistics company very similar to the one he used to own. A massive portion of his meager paycheck was being violently garnished by the bankruptcy courts to pay off the mountain of debt Chloe had left him with. He was a completely broken man, entirely stripped of his unearned arrogance, and finally understanding the true cost of his blind loyalty. I sat on my living room couch late one Friday evening, sipping a glass of expensive red wine, while Jaden and Lily played a board game on the plush carpet. My cell phone sat on the coffee table completely silent. I picked it up and unlocked the screen. I scrolled through my message application until I found the Brooks Family Blessings group chat. For years, that chat had been a constant source of severe anxiety, passive-aggressive insults, and toxic financial demands. It was the digital stage where Chloe paraded her fake wealth and Aunt Kendra launched her vicious daily attacks against my character. Now the chat was nothing but a digital graveyard. It had been completely dead silent for exactly 3 months. Nobody dared to post an update. Nobody dared to brag. And most importantly, nobody ever dared to ask me for a single dime. I stared at the name of the group chat, feeling a profound sense of absolute closure wash over me. I did not type a witty parting message or a final gloating insult to the relatives who had watched me suffer. They were not worth another second of my time or my energy. I simply swiped left on the conversation thread and pressed the bright red delete button. A small prompt asked me to confirm if I wanted to permanently leave the group and delete all the messages. I pressed confirm without a single ounce of hesitation. The chat vanished from my screen, taking decades of toxic family history with it. I set my phone back down on the coffee table, smiled at my beautiful children, and finally began living the peaceful, wealthy life we truly deserved. That peaceful evening in my living room marked the true beginning of our new chapter. 6 months later, the crisp autumn air whipped around us as I stood on the pristine concrete walkway of my latest and most ambitious commercial development project. I was no longer hiding behind the facade of a struggling administrative assistant. I was standing tall as the sole owner and chief executive officer of Apex Holdings. Next to me stood Jaden and Lily, their faces beaming with genuine pride and absolute security. Today was not a fraudulent anniversary party funded by bounce checks and stolen corporate accounts. Today was the official ribbon-cutting ceremony for a $50 million mixed-use commercial plaza that I had built from the ground up. Local city officials and prominent business leaders gathered around the grand entrance, applauding loudly as my children and I stepped up to the thick red ribbon draped across the main glass doors. I handed Jaden and Lily the oversized ceremonial scissors. We counted to 3 together and they squeezed the handles, snapping the heavy red fabric in half. The crowd cheered, the cameras flashed, and for the first time in my entire life, I allowed my success to be photographed and documented in the public eye. But unlike Chloe, I did not need the applause to validate my existence. I did not need the flash of the cameras to prove my worth. I owned the concrete we were standing on and the heavy steel beams towering above us. The applause was just pleasant background noise to the profound financial security I had successfully secured for my family. After the ceremony concluded and the wealthy guests moved inside to tour the new retail spaces, I pulled Jaden and Lily aside. We walked to a quiet landscaped courtyard at the edge of the sprawling property, sitting down together on a polished stone bench, away from the noise of the large crowd. Lily leaned her head against my shoulder, and Jaden looked up at the massive glass windows of the towering office building. "Mom," he asked, his voice filled with quiet curiosity, "if you owned all of these buildings and had all this money the whole time, why did we live in that small apartment? Why did you let Aunt Kendra and Aunt Chloe say those horrible things to you when you could have just bought their houses and made them stop?" I wrapped my arms around both of my children, holding them close against the crisp autumn wind. It was the perfect moment to teach them the absolute most valuable lesson they would ever learn about money and human nature. I looked at Jaden and smiled gently. I hid our money because I needed to know exactly who our family really was. I explained, my voice steady and completely at peace. When people think you have absolutely nothing, they show you exactly who they are. They take off their polite masks. If I had shown them my corporate wealth from the very beginning, they would have pretended to love me just to drain my bank accounts. They would have used me just like Chloe used your Uncle Marcus. I took a deep breath, letting the clean air fill my lungs. "I want you both to listen to me very carefully," I said, looking deeply into their young eyes. "True wealth is never about wearing a $5,000 designer dress to a hotel party just to make other people feel incredibly small. It is not about driving a leased luxury car you cannot actually afford, or bragging loudly to church friends who secretly hate you. Those things are just loud, cheap illusions for people who are deeply insecure and financially empty. Real wealth is entirely invisible. Real wealth is having the absolute power to protect your own peace. It is having the financial freedom to simply walk away from toxic people who refuse to respect your personal boundaries. It means you never have to tolerate verbal abuse or disrespect just to keep a solid roof over your head. I built this company in absolute silence so that you too would never ever have to depend on people who do not truly value you." Jaden and Lily nodded slowly, fully understanding the heavy weight of my words. They had personally witnessed the absolute destruction of fake wealth and the quiet, undeniable power of real success. They were safe. They were completely secure. And they were finally free from the toxic generational cycle of financial abuse and emotional manipulation that had plagued my family for decades. I watched my children smile brightly at each other, their futures completely unburdened and entirely limitless. I stood up from the stone bench, looking out at the sprawling commercial empire I had quietly built with my own two hands. I looked directly into the camera, breaking the invisible barrier between my personal story and the audience listening at home. Have you ever had to use your own success in absolute silence to defeat loud, aggressive disrespect? Have you ever let toxic people dig their own graves while you quietly built your empire in the background? Share your own stories in the comments below. Because as I learned the hard way, sometimes the absolute greatest revenge is not what you scream at your enemies. It is what you legally own when the screaming finally stops. Maya's journey powerfully illustrates that true character is revealed not by how people treat their equals, but by how they treat those they believe are beneath them. By choosing to hide her immense financial success, Maya inadvertently created a perfect, unforgiving mirror for her family's deeply toxic dynamics. Her brother Marcus, sister-in-law Chloe, and Aunt Kendra all falsely equated basic human worth with visible flashy wealth. They felt entirely justified in their cruelty manipulation and staggering entitlement simply because they believed Maya lacked the financial leverage to defend herself or fight back. This narrative highlights a profound contrast between loud insecurity and quiet, unshakable power. Chloe's frantic need to display her fabricated wealth through designer dresses, exclusive memberships, and lavish hotel parties was ultimately a fragile mask, hiding massive debt and federal fraud. In stark contrast, Maya's intentional silence became her greatest shield and her sharpest weapon. She understood early on that true prosperity is never about proving your social status to people who are stubbornly committed to misunderstanding you. Instead, it is about securing the absolute freedom to protect your peace, establish firm boundaries, and walk away from emotional extortion without a single ounce of guilt. We frequently encounter individuals who use their perceived privilege to diminish others. Maya's ultimate victory was not merely foreclosing on a fraudulent business or executing a long overdue eviction against a terrible tenant. Her true victory was breaking a bitter generational cycle of financial abuse and teaching her children that self-worth is never dictated by the cruel opinions of relatives. Setting firm, uncompromising boundaries against manipulative people is an act of profound self-respect. Take a moment to evaluate the relationships in your own life today and bravely sever the ties with anyone who only values you for what they can extract from you.